Hello, everybody. Welcome to Trad Reviews Live. I am solo tonight. Alexander, my buddy, my partner normally on these streams, is busy, and he did not have a chance to see the movie. And if you haven't had a chance to see the movie, you don't really know what you're talking about when it comes to this movie. And I suppose that's where I want to start. People are already upset that I'm going to be talking about this film, that I would say, how dare you would say that a Catholic could watch this. I didn't say that it was a traditional Catholic movie. I said that I'm going to give my Catholic perspective on this movie. So I have a lot of notes, and as I wrote it, some of my conclusions different, but I've got notes on both sides. Let's start by the fact that this story has been around for millennia, and it's been around my life for most of my life in different forms. I don't mean I've been reading it every year for my life, but I read it when I was a child in a junior edition. I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, and a little junior edition of the Odyssey. I have that same type of edition of Folio Junior in French. When I was working on my French to learn, I was reading a junior edition of the Odyssey there. And I read it in high school. I read it in college and undergrad. I've read it since that time. I've read it for a postgraduate seminar. I've read the Odyssey numerous times, and it's a wonderful story, as Homer tells it. And what you have to imagine, and as I've always said this to people, an adaptation of a story is not the story. So, for example, there's always people fighting about the 1995 Pride and Prejudice versus the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, as if there's a competition. One was a television series, one was a movie. Neither of them were a book. People can adapt source material. So I look at this as an adaptation the way that I look at Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune. Dune is absolutely epic. How are you going to compress that? And when I saw that film, my first thing when I came out of the theater, I told people, I said, that is an impression of Dune. So too, I think this is an impression of the Odyssey. Oh, we already got the 1995 people already entering the chat. There's a discussion for another time. But in any case, the idea of this this is inspired by the Odyssey, I would say. How are you going to compress the Odyssey into 3 hours and have it be anything other than a highlight reel? Anything but an impression based on the things that you want to talk about as a director, as a writer. And that's what Nolan is giving us. I also will admit to a few things. I love seeing movies in IMAX. I generally like Christopher Nolan movies, not just but I've watched them multiple times. The only time I haven't watched a Christopher Nolan movie was Oppenheimer, because I knew that there was sensuality in it. I'm too far along in my traditional Catholic journey to go watch movies like that. So I won't watch it. I made sure ahead of time that there wasn't anything like that. For this, I actually went with my mother. So there's nothing in that way that would prevent, I would argue, older teenagers, 19, 20 years, because the violence is serious. And I don't want to toss that aside like that's nothing. But there's nothing in terms of sensuality. So that's positive. And then someone would say, you're not being faithful to the source material. What about Cersei? What about Calypso? Yeah, that's my point. Just because the source material has that doesn't mean that you have to put it on the screen. It doesn't mean you have to be faithful and in the adaptation of it. All right. So that's the tour d'horizon that I just want to give at the outset of the Odyssey as a story is important to me in many ways. And I'm happy to see any adaptation of the source material in general. Okay. Now, we all had bad feelings going into this. The social media has been replete with, look at this, look at this, look at this. And I thought, I'm going to give Christopher Nolan a chance. He's earned that social capital with me as someone who appreciates his work. As long as there wasn't any sensuality, I was going to give it a shot. And as I came out of the theater and I was telling my mom about how I felt, I said, I have to deduct 15 points off the top of any score I give because of the tokenism, because of the very clear DEI agenda. Is Christopher Nolan trying to win a DEI Oscar? I don't know. I don't know. It feels that way. So I wrote here, bad news first. So let's start with the bad news first. Unbelievable tokenism. An unbelievable amount of tokenism. And actors who don't deliver. So we have Zendaya as Athena. Zendaya contributes nothing as Athena, doesn't have the gravitas necessary for parts of what Athena is. Yes, there's parts of Athena where she, in the Odyssey, in the source material, she is playful and she's a young child, but Athena adapts, and Zendaya isn't believable as a more mature Athena. She only ever feels to us as a child. Bad casting choice. I don't know whether Tom Holland, as her significant other, got her this job, but no value add from Zendaya. To Travis Scott, who's someone I don't even really know because I'm not into that music scene. He's there as a bard, feels tokenist. You just have this black man acting as a bard at the beginning and end of the film, screen time nil, maybe 30, 45 seconds on either end of things, doesn't contribute anything. So if I say I'm going to bring this celebrity in, or I'm going to bring in this token person, they better kill it. Didn't. Robert Pattinson, who does have acting ability. Anyone who says that he doesn't, I don't think is paying close enough attention to his work, but is incredibly annoying here as the would-be suitor of Penelope. I don't think he rises to the occasion. He just ends up being annoying. Ellen Page, who everyone thought was going to be Achilles, and she's not. He's not Achilles. He's playing Sinon, who doesn't really appear in the Odyssey, as far as I can remember. He's more in the Iliad. I think we even see him in the Aeneid as well. So he's in the classical tradition, which shows Nolan is reaching out for different inspirations and different ways of thinking about things. But his contribution, her contribution, whatever you want to say, I generally tend to refer to these people by their original names. So Ellen Page, who we last saw in Inception with Nolan, where I think she did a fine job, actually, and doesn't do anything spectacular here. Feels token. Why don't we add a trans actor? So we have Zendaya, so we have our woman of color, we have Travis Scott, we have a man of color. Robert Pattinson, because Nolan is loyal to his actors, you'll see the same actors come up over and over in movies. Ellen Page, she's loyal to his actors, but she doesn't do anything special in this film. Her performance is average at best. Lupita Nyong'o. So this, lots of people are calling her ugly. I think objectively she's not ugly. You may not be attracted to Black women, but she is not an ugly person. It's crazy to say that. A lot of people are parading around her, this image of her screaming at, but they give you no context. That is, yes, she is the same actress that plays Helen, but in a twist here, Nolan makes Clytemnestra a twin sister of Helen, which is not true in the source material, which would also then seem to imply Helen was not unique, which ties into the greater agenda here of attacking the patriarchy through this misogyny, that if Helen wasn't the face that launched 1,000 ships, there were actually two of them, her and her twin sister, then what you have. So that angry face is her as Clytemnestra murdering Agamemnon, which that goes into the Oresteia, and you have to understand the murder of Iphigenia at the beginning of the Iliad. Different conversation, but Lupita Nyong'o doesn't deliver anything for us. Once again, if you're going to swap someone out, if you want to make a statement, I want to be bowled over by that person. I'm okay with you trying something, but you should do something great with it. And I'm not familiar with her work. I haven't seen her in anything else, so I have nothing else to judge her by, but she did an average job at best, both as Clytemnestra and as Helen. Diane Kruger, I wouldn't say in the Troy adaptation of years ago, didn't necessarily do an amazing job as Helen of Troy, but she was believable as the face that launched 1,000 ships. I can only say that as a man. We have a token unnamed Asian character as part of Odysseus's crew who tears off his earwax and dives in with a siren. So now we have we have a yellow character. Anne Hathaway as a boss babe. We have that checked. And strangely enough, I think Anne Hathaway does a remarkable job as a matriarch, as a queen through most of the film. And yet, towards the end, she has to say, how basically commenting on the Salic law, why can't a woman rule? What about my experience? What about my gravitas? And what's wonderful, the Tom Holland character just passes over it. He doesn't react, and he just basically moves on. And I wonder, it just feels so inserted. It almost feels token within Nolan. I had to say this, but it's not serious enough to engage with, which is why Telemachus moves past it. So Anne Hathaway as boss babe, check. And of course, this is all led by the Emily Wilson translation. Emily Wilson, who considers this a misogynist work. And if you talk to any of your friends who understand the classics, I am not, when I say classics, they read them in the original, they read them in the Greek, they read them in the Latin. Ask them about the Emily Wilson translation. They will tell you far more than I will. I'm not going to speak on something I'm not an expert in this particular case, but just go read some of the Emily Wilson translation. If you don't want to buy it, go to a bookstore, pick it up off the shelf, and spend 5 minutes and laugh your way through it. Okay. So bad news first. When I wrote that down originally, as I said, I came out of the movie theater and I told my mom 15 points knocked off immediately. And then I wrote all this down and I wrote 20 points, 20 points. So the highest the film can score for me is an 80. If everything else is correct, it's an 80. Okay. So we're starting there, a B, or for Asians, an F, right, at 80. But all joking aside, I want to make sure I include this. I'm a Black woman, and I think if they want to be diverse so badly, they can go into different cultures and recreate something from there. Yeah, Sede, thank you for sharing your perspective. So here on the back of my notes, I wrote down the different themes that are useful to think about. And I think what's important when we engage with the culture around us, because we have to realize the culture around us is opposed to God. It is opposed to his church. It is opposed to reason. It is opposed to morality. It's opposed to everything. That doesn't mean there are not lessons to teach. That doesn't mean that there are not lessons that can be given. You can glean things from observing the culture around. And what's interesting is this is a piece of culture that tells on itself. It observes the zeitgeist. It knows there's something deeply wrong. Over and over in the film, there is an allusion to the people from the sea. Because obviously the Greeks have this obsession with all the islands that they have and protecting themselves. And that's part of understanding the guest friend culture. And we see these encounters in the Iliad where someone would be saved from killing somebody because, oh yes, my father stayed with your father, 2 generations ago or whatever. And of course we can't fight each other. Let's go fight someone else. Such that if you were a stranger in a Greek town and you couldn't provide an account for yourself, or you couldn't connect to anyone that anyone else knew, it was lawful to kill you because you represented danger. In this film, there is a sense that the fall of Troy means that we're going into a dark age and that bad things are happening. You want to talk about a film telling on the zeitgeist. Something bad is happening. Yeah. We have major problems all around the world because of our actions that we've taken. This isn't something that's happened to us. Oh, poor us. We have taken actions against God, against his church, against common sense, against mathematics. And we are reaping the whirlwind of that now. So the film seems to sense this. Something bad is on the way, and we're about to enter a dark age. So what are some themes that the film explores successfully? Well, obviously, there's the power of home. The idea that despite going off to war, the thing that always brings Odysseus back, despite the fact that he's captured by these beautiful goddesses like Circe and Calypso, is he wants to go home to what would have been his middle-aged wife and his son that he's never known. The journey, of course, you can't go home again. That is a recurring theme in literature and in epic, that you change along the way. And whenever you come back home, things will be different, for better or for worse. And there's so many beautiful notes there. I think one of the most touching points in the film, P.S. spoiler alerts galore here. So if you don't intend on seeing the movie, great, I'm going to spoil it for you. If you do intend on seeing the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, this might be a good time to pause and maybe watch this later. But a very moving scene towards the end, if you know the original source material, Odysseus' hunting dog is left out on the dung heap by the suitors. He's old, he's blind, he can't really move, but he's waiting for Odysseus to come back. And Odysseus comes back and touches the dog. The dog recognizes his master and dies. Telemachus is observing this, and Odysseus says, bury him up by the cliffs. And there's a moment here, Telemachus goes, where you met him? You're my father. Very moving part of the story, this recognition of this father I never knew. I only knew him through stories. This connection with this loyal dog who was tossed out on the dung heap, and the master comes back as a beggar, as in disguise. Extraordinarily moving. There are lots of set pieces in this film which are going to resonate in the same way that other set pieces within Nolan films resonate for me. I think about the docking sequence in Interstellar. Matthew McConaughey. I think about the final dream sequence at the end of Inception, where we have a set piece and it's executed so well. The scene of the suitors at the end, exceptional. I don't think we've seen anything like that in cinema using the source material. Once again, I'm not saying it's quote unquote hyper accurate. This is an adaptation by an artist. He is allowed to have creative license, creative liberty with how he thinks about things. And I can't comment on costuming, the ships, et cetera. I'm going to leave that to people who are really competent, well studied on that. But it feels lived in. It feels very thought through, even to the design. When I saw them unfurl the sail on the boats, I thought they had to build that. Same thing for the set of Troy, for the burning of Troy. They had to build that set, and I thought it was just so well done. And of course, hundreds of millions of dollars spent. It's not that surprising about that. Peter's asking, is this the movie that everyone was calling woke? Yes, it was. And I've already listed, if you missed the live stream, I spent the first 10 minutes talking about all the woke tokenism in there. And the reason I said, actually, I didn't explain that. The reason I marked it down is because it was so obvious that it was irritating when it happened, but the rest of the film is good enough to wash that out. But it's still irritating. So you have Ellen Page coming up for 45 seconds, and then later on for maybe 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. Doesn't feel very long. Lupita Nyong'o, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes total. She's not on very, and you know what's happening to you. You know that the DEI agenda is being forced on you. It's unpleasant, and you're asking yourself, why, Christopher? Why? Because you want an Oscar so badly. So yes, that tokenism is irritating, and that's a mark against the film. I've never had that happen to me in a Nolan film before, where I'm irritated by something he's doing that doesn't need to be done. Can I say a little bit? There was a little bit in Interstellar, but that's more for my own taste. There wasn't a DEI agenda beat. This is so heavily DEI, it's ridiculous. The Telemachus journey, Tom Holland, I haven't seen too much of his work, but I think he does a really good job here as Telemachus. Have to give him his flowers there. Navigating dangers, literally Scylla and Charybdis, I think well done. Obviously, everything today is CGI. There's no practical effects very often, unless you're in a Denis Villeneuve film, which this one is not. Beautiful sirens, visual effect. So as the bosun is putting the wax into his ears as they're going to pass the sirens, the sound mutes. So as it feels as if you just put wax in your ears. And the musical choice, the sound design for this scene is such that we are thinking about what beautiful music would sound like. And this is something a Hitchcock would do very often in the films. Instead of trying to do something, he would leave it to your imagination. He always said, I can't do what your imagination could do. I'd rather suggest something to you and you think it. And so we see Matt Damon writhing in pain, hearing the Song of the Sirens, and we hear some allusion to some music, and we're thinking about what a siren song is. And that's excellent, excellent filmmaking, excellent storytelling. Storytelling again here with Nolan. Remember that this is Nolan is obsessed with memory and time. It is a theme throughout his films. This is something that is also the same for Kazuo Ishiguro. If you read Ishiguro's novels, he is obsessed with memory and time, and it keeps coming back. Has haunted by it such that he has to keep writing books about it. One of my favorite novels of all time, Remains of the Day. Ishiguro is about memory and time. And we see this in Nolan movies. And what's wonderful is this does mimic the text, because in the text, when we get to a scene in which Odysseus has to tell a story, we are taken back in time to that event as he tells the story in the present. So that seamless moving between the different storylines, Telemachus's own journey, which is a Bildungsroman, a coming of age, Penelope's struggle with the suitors, own story, Odysseus' story, and then the sort of larger theme that Nolan is trying to make this movie about, which is the violation of Zeus's law, which is not what the source material is about. But as I say, the artist is welcome to adapt the source material as he wishes. And I think you can still get useful useful reflections from what he's doing there. We have what's of primary concern to us as Catholics, this adversarial relationship with the gods. So I defy the gods, your gods. He talks about your gods to these men who have more piety, who says, why don't you pray to Poseidon? Why don't you apologize for what you did? And Matt Damon is this outsider, except with Athena. And then there's a final, let's say, realization at the end of the film. Obviously, the source material is treated differently. But this adversarial notion, he says the gods help those who help themselves. He's an activist. And this is something we have to be careful of as Christians, that yes, there is always a tension between the providence of God and our own cooperation with that providence. How far do we go? But there's an adversarial relationship, which is underlined here, that Nolan wanted to emphasize with his Odysseus. There's a strong conception of love between the husband and wife. Obviously, to keep coming back after 20 years to try to come to your home, there has to be an element of love there. But I think it's done in a very smart and thoughtful way by two actors who are older people and who I think they're both married, and I think they have that sense of a different stage in your marital relationship from when they left each other. They were with a newborn. Not quite newlyweds, but they had not been married for a very long time. And there is a changed ending. Now, when you say there's a changed ending, you have to realize there's different understandings of Odysseus in literature. For example, there's Tennyson's poem about Odysseus, in which Ulysses is how it's rendered. But Ulysses is restless. He's been gone 20 years, going on all these adventures. Everybody dies. But when he comes back to Ithaca, he can't stay there, and he has to leave. And that Tennyson poem ends to strive, to seek, to yield, and not to find. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Beautiful poem. But that restlessness, that something has happened to you that doesn't allow you to stay home, that is an alternative ending in poetry written by Tennyson. Someone would say, well, Tennyson wasn't loyal to the source material. How dare he change the ending? You're allowed to do that. That's part of artistry. That's part of literature. You riff on things. So to hear, and go back to Lord of the Rings, when they go back to the Shire, the wounds have been so deep, they can't stay. They can't stay and be happy with Sam. They have to go. They have to go to the West. There is a departure for the West, just as the elves did. There is a notion here of departure for the West, because that's going to be the succession. That's just known in Western literature. We're going to move from the East to the West. So whether Nolan wanted to participate in that or not, we see at the end a movement to the West. And the ending of the Odyssey, for those who are not familiar with it, involves Athena intervening against the relatives of the suitors, who Odysseus kills everybody. Now, in this adaptation, he does not. Let's say he kills more than 60% of the suitors and the staff, the disloyal servants. He kills them. And there, in the source material, Athena intervenes to prevent the lawful vengeance against Odysseus from the families of the suitors. The idea that, oh, well, the suitors were wrong, but in that time, in that culture, it was right to seek vengeance for you killing my relative. Athena intervenes at the end of the source material, the Odyssey. And I joked about this in a conversation with Dr. Thomas Fleming, talking about the source material, which I put a link in the description. I think it's premiering now, or it premiered a little while ago. If you want to see it, the link's in the description. Dr. Thomas Fleming, who's a classicist, very well trained, and I asked him to just talk about the source material for people who may not be familiar with it. And it's an ending which is in line with the time period insofar as you could choose death or exile. And in this particular case, you couldn't say you could choose death or exile. Exile was an acceptable substitute for death. If you wanted to avoid it, it could be adjudicated that you could choose exile. It wasn't always allowed. So the fact that he chooses exile, hands over the kingdom to Telemachus, and goes with his wife to the West, harvesting a little nugget that we were told at the beginning of the film, which you'd have to see to understand, is a satisfying ending for this adaptation. And it fits, it makes sense. We also see the old themes, which we'll always see in epics. Monsters, for Christians, we understand this very clearly as sin. Monsters are sin that can destroy everything around you, and seem to have no purpose, but they are inspired by our lack of conformity to God's will and a lack of willingness to live the life that he asks of us. We also see prophecy and this question of, well, can I fight prophecy? And as Christians, we have an understanding of providence, that providence is ordained to our good, and our job is to conform ourselves to that, not to fight providence, and to try always in our prayer lives and in our consultations to understand providence's role in our life, not to fight providence. And that's the tension that the Matt Damon Odysseus has to have. So if you notice, all these things that I'm commenting about are fruitful reflections about things that the film explores, whether you like the agenda. And if you say, Stephen, all the things you said in the first 10 minutes of I can't do that. I cannot watch the movie and deal with that. That's fine. That's fine. I'm not saying you need to watch it. And I didn't call it, as someone implied prior to this live stream, that it was a traditional Catholic movie or that traditional Catholics should watch this. I just said a traditional Catholic could watch this, in part because there's no sensuality, but also because I think there are some important lessons that one can take. There are some incredible visual and cinematic scenes. And it's the DEI culture telling on itself. I can't think of a more documented tokenist film that I've seen. Now, keep in mind, I haven't seen a lot of DEI films. I haven't even seen a lot of films in the theaters in the last 5 years. But it's so DEI, it's so tokenist, you can't believe it. So all that said, I said I marked it down. I gave it an 80 if it executed everything else correctly. I like enough of it. And it's been, gosh, has it been 10 hours now since I've seen it? I still feel pretty good about it. And maybe I'll feel differently in the morning, but I can't hate it as some woke adaptation, because it isn't that. There is a lot of tokenism sprinkled in. There is that wokeism sprinkled in, but it's not the majority of the movie. It was 20% to me, but it wasn't 20% of the runtime. I don't even know if it was 5% of the runtime. That would be huge if it was even 5%. I don't think it's 5% of the time. It was 2 hours and 52 minutes. I don't think it was 5% of that. So just something to think about, that everyone was, who said this? X was crashing out over this film. Yeah, people were crashing out over it. And I think if you don't want to watch it, don't watch it. But please don't make us look ridiculous by having an opinion about something you haven't seen and say it is this and it is that when you haven't seen it. All you saw was some clips of angry Lupita Nyong'o on Reddit, and now you know everything about the movie. As I said, I would lead any description of this by saying it is definitely a DEI tokenist version, but that part of it is not significant enough to stop me from seeing it, and not bad enough to prevent me from enjoying a large part of the film. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Are there any questions in the chat before I wrap up? I'm live streamed out today. I had a live stream with the bishop not too long ago, and I do need to go to bed at some point. Okay, I don't see any additional questions. All right, so thanks for taking the time to stop by. As I said, if you're watching this later, there's a link in the description to Dr. Thomas Fleming's discussion of the Odyssey. And if you don't know the source material, this is a great time to read it. This is another opportunity to film. People like the Odyssey. Oh, I've never read it. It's a great time to read it. Don't read the Emily Wilson translation that this film is based off of, because it's trash. But go read something else. Dr. Fleming has some strong opinions about that. I think he'll probably push you to the Pope, which I think is a lovely translation. But go check it out and use that as an opportunity to read the text if you haven't. Once you've read the text, maybe then come to the film. But if you're going to see it in IMAX. There's no point in watching it outside of IMAX. The cinematography, the sound design, the music, the moments, the set pieces, it's all worth it. Even though I had to pay this DEI toll to get through it, it was worth it. Thanks for stopping by, and look forward to your comments afterwards. I'll do my best to answer them. See you later.